I'm really, really excited now because I get to welcome to the stage Katie Richards, who is the CEO of Virtual Legal, and she has built the most incredible business, and we're very, very excited to have her here because the legal side of business isn't always the easy side. So please keep an open mind, and if you have questions, don't be afraid to ask them because there are no silly questions. Okay.
There's definitely no silly questions. Hi guys, I hope you've had an amazing morning so far. Now, the way that I'd really like to run today is I've split things off into different areas of business. Now, just in case there's people here that actually aren't in business and you're in career, it's actually really important for you to understand what happens for the guys in business because you're probably working for a business, I'd say. And if you can understand what happens in a business, then you can be a lot more valuable in what you do for that person you work with. So we'll start moving through it, and I'll give you the opportunity to ask questions at the end of each slide as opposed to waiting right until the end where you might have forgotten what we were talking about. So the first thing I want to say is that we get a lot of people coming in and we have to do a bit of cleanup work for them because they've thought that entrepreneurship is sexy and business is this amazing thing to get into. And as much as that can sometimes be the case, it can also be a massive roller coaster and a bit of a punch in the face. So you need to make sure that you're ready for business and that it's actually suitable to you, not just because someone has inspired you to maybe get your own business down the track because you're passionate about something. You can be passionate about something without spending your whole life in it. So when you're having these conversations about whether you should start a business, make sure that you speak to your family about it, your partner, even your kids if you've got kids, because everyone around you is going to be impacted by what you do in business. And they also will go through that emotional roller coaster and cash flow roller coaster with you over the years. So make sure you talk about the lifestyle piece before you jump. The second thing to always consider before you get into it and also along the way is business planning. So they say if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. It's really true. You don't have to sit there with your business plan 24/7 and just read over it and you say, okay, well, this is what we said we were going to do. We have to keep doing that all the way through. Your business is going to change. Legislation's going to change. The way you work will change. But make sure you've got some form of plan so you know where you're going and where your money's going to come from. Make sure that you've got, say, 3 to 6 months worth of cash flow before you jump as well. And also make sure that if you're going to have income protection insurance, get that before you leave your job. Because once you've left your job, you've got zero cash flow to back up your income protection. And make sure it's an agreed value, not just an indemnity policy. But I won't speak about the insurance side, just some things that I've gotten wrong when I jumped into my business. So don't be silly like me. Okay. Now, one of the more important elements that people start out as a sole trader, and that might work for a lot of businesses. We started out as a company because I knew from day one we were going to make more than $75,000 in a year. So make sure you speak to your accountant and get a plan for what your structure should be before you actually dive into it as well. The reason being is that there obviously will be taxes that will apply when you have to change entities down the track. So you don't want to penalize yourself as well. Also, the benefits of having a company the benefits of having a company over the top of the cost of actually having a company is not what people think. I speak at a few of these events and people will start saying, oh, but having a company is really expensive. You have to have audits. You have to have this and that. It's actually generally not that bad. And the amount of tax you can save is generally quite good. So make sure you have that conversation with your accountant. I'd recommend, if you can, have a quarterly catch up with them so you can talk about your legal risks that are inherent in the numbers. Make sure you're obviously always solvently trading because if your business can't pay its bills as and when they fall due, it's actually a criminal offense and you have to shut your company down. Be a little bit careful around giving guarantees. So if you set up this wonderful tax structure, say a company with a discretionary trust is always a great way to go. But if you then go and give a personal guarantee on your lease, personal guarantee to all of your suppliers, it doesn't matter what kind of wonderful structure that you've got because you've just put all of your assets back on the line again. So just be careful of giving personal guarantees. Sometimes, say for a lease, you might be able to say, okay, instead of having a personal guarantee, I'll give you more bond. and they'll just hold extra funds. So do ask that question if you can. And also, when you change entities from a sole trader over to a company or whatever change you're going to make, don't forget that you have to change all of your contracts. You've got to change your zero. It's like selling your business. So you have to swap from whatever you're doing here right over. All your employees have to change to the new entity. What happens if you don't actually do all of those other paperwork changes along the way? You're still liable personally. Even though you're operating now in a company, that supplier can sue you personally. Your employee can have an issue with you personally. So you're still on the line no matter what's going on in the new business. So be really careful of that. A lot of people make mistakes in that regard. Has anyone got any questions around that before we move on? Yeah. Oh, okay. So a guarantee is essentially where you're saying, if my business can't pay this bill, I personally will pay the bill. So I will make sure that the bill is paid. So for me with virtual legal, I sign a lot of things obviously for virtual legal, especially with working overseas. And they'll say, okay, we'll put your name on the line. Well, that's okay because I don't put any assets in my name. So I say, yeah, sure, you've got me. But that's because I know that everything else is structured in a way that the assets are safe. So that's another conversation to have with your accountant. Accountants are really important for your business and maybe a financial planner too. But yeah, that's basically what a guarantee is. And you'll be surprised where guarantees will pop up. Yeah. Okay. One of the things we see a lot in employment agreements are what we call cashbacks. You can't just say to someone, all right, well, if I give you a little bit of training and you leave on this date, you're going to have to pay me back for all the training that I gave you to do on that job. Be really careful around that. If there's quite heavy penalties and fines. So if you're not sure whether your employment agreement is compliant with the awards, do ask that question. Keep in mind that Fair Work Australia will give you a relatively good amount of advice, but getting the employment piece right is really critical because it's not just if you could potentially get a fine, it's also your brand reputation. So, and once you get damaged, someone will jump online and say, "What a rubbish company to work for." Guess how long that stays online for? Forever. It's terrible. Well, they'll give you a one rating, like a 1-star rating. I've seen that happen to a couple of people. One of our clients the other day has just shut down their Google star ratings because they can't get this 1-star off there that was put on there by an employee. And now their business is like looking at, their solvency issues, right? So they might actually lose their whole business because they were getting all of their ratings on Google and this guy's just smashed them online. So be really careful. Yeah. Interns can be really valuable. One thing to watch out for when you're doing interns, though, make sure that the work that you're getting them to do is relevant to the course or whatever it is that they've come from, because we've got an issue in Australia where you're not allowed to do slave labor. And a lot of people try, especially the startups who are cash flow negative and they need someone to come and help them do all the building work. But if you get someone to come in and they say, okay, they were working in the IT space and you just get them to do all your filing and photocopying for you, you can get in big trouble for that. So just make sure that you're being a reasonable person about it. But interns are a really great way to get a resource in your business and potentially a future employee. Make sure if you do interns, get some form of agreement drawn up like you would as an employee, though. That makes sure that if they come up with stuff while they're working with you, that intellectual property vests in your business as well, just as though they're an employee. You don't want them walking away with all your great ideas. Now, as we're talking about the IP vesting in your business, whether it's a contractor agreement or it's an employment agreement or your intern agreements, make sure that in your intellectual property clauses in your agreements, especially if you're drafting them yourself, make sure that anything that they come up with while they work for you belongs to the business. That's really critical. Also, make sure that you have restraints of trade in your agreements as well, which means you don't want to make it silly so that your employees can't work somewhere else, because a court of law will never let that stand. But you can use a tiered approach, and you can say, okay, well, within say 20 kilometers of the business, or if too extensive, within 10 kilometers, so that what a court would do if you ever got into a position where you had to enforce your restraint is they will basically say, okay, well, 20 is too much. No, 10's too much. We'll let you have 5, rather than striking the whole thing out and saying you've got no restraint at all. So just think about little things like that. And also with contractors. So some people will get contractors into their business so that they don't have to pay super. That's not necessarily how that works. So if they're spending majority of their time working for your business, it's highly likely that you have to pay their super. Make sure you give Fair Work a call, because that's the cheap way of getting advice around that, and just ask them, this is what they're doing. This is how much time, the percentage of their time they're spending with us, especially if you've got some kind of clause in their contractor agreement that says you can't work for anyone else while you're working for me. That will be one of those things that will say, yep, that's likely that you're treating them like an employee, even if they're set up as a company. There still could be that liability. Okay, in terms of protecting your business online, do many people have only online businesses here? Yeah, fair few. Okay, so privacy policy and the GDPR. You don't need to be GDPR compliant if you're only selling in Australia. So if someone's saying, oh, well, your privacy policy isn't GDPR compliant, that's great. You're not in the UK. Okay, so it's for the United Kingdom. So if you're not selling specifically to people in the UK, you don't need to go to the extra expense of making sure that you change all your terms to be compliant with another country's terms. If someone from the UK happens to drop into your Australian website that you're selling to Australian people and they happen to buy a product, great. But you're not deliberately making an effort to sell to them to collect their data. So it's okay. But do make sure that you've got a privacy policy on your website, because you will be collecting cookies via your computer. You'll probably be collecting their names and email addresses. So you are still collecting data of some sort, and it's just a hot topic these days. So make sure you do that. It's extremely cheap to get a privacy policy set up. If you are doing terms online and they're actually buying from you online, you'll obviously have some terms around whatever payment system you're using already. But make sure that if people have the ability to post on some kind of chat forum, that you have your terms of use on your website. If someone defames someone else and you weren't the person that wrote that, but you've got it on your website and you haven't taken it down straight away, you can get done for defamation because you're reposting. And if someone else grabs that and then comments on it again, they too can get done for defamation because they're reposting again. Same thing that happens on Facebook. Be really careful about what you post on Facebook. Number one, because it's there forever. But number two, because you can get in trouble for what people post on your business Facebook profile. So just watch it. Yeah. Yes, yeah, post and comment, depending on what your security levels are as to what they can do. But if someone else writes something on there, you can get in trouble for that. We also had one of the, I was trying to think who it was, they bought Getty Images. Did anyone see what happened a few years ago with the Getty Images, where people hadn't been buying the images and just copying them from other places? They used a computer robot that just trawled through the internet, and they found everyone that had one of those images. They then checked it against their database. Oh, you haven't paid. You have to send us, $1,200 for this, $600 for that, or we'll sue you. We had this come in a few times because one of our clients had a businesses to sell website. So he hadn't even posted any of these things, but he got this big bill because technically he had posted this content on his website. So we then had to draft the rules of his website. If you haven't paid for your images, you indemnify us for any damage that's caused. Yeah, but that cost him a bit to get out of that. Copyright. So anything that you come up with, you don't have to register copyright in Australia. You just have to put your company name beside it, and then the little C in the circle, and then the year that you came up with it. So make sure you do that. Your intellectual property is one of the most valuable things in your business. You can't make money without your intellectual property because people aren't going to buy just nothing. So make sure you do that. Also keep in mind, if you're having some kind of dispute with someone, brand reputation, this is probably less a legal thing, but brand reputation is everything. Sometimes it's easier, even if you're right, it can sometimes be easier to say, okay, look, let's just negotiate something. And I do say that to my clients all the time. Let's talk about what you can do. Now let's have a business owner to business owner conversation. This is ridiculous. You're going to go down. I know having morals in business is really important, but then sticking to your ground can cost you your business. So just be really careful around what's the right thing to do for your business, not necessarily what's the right thing that you could do when you have a rampant client, because again, they can give you the 1 stars. They can do these things online. So it's not always worth fighting. You have to pick and choose each time, and maybe ask each other, like use each other for support when it comes to these situations, but don't ask each other on Facebook. Have that conversation offline or call me. I'll have that conversation with you. Now, marketing. The Australian consumer laws have what we call statutory warranties. So if someone buys something from you and there's a defect with it, you can't say, oh, well, look, it was a sale item. If it doesn't work, you have to do something about it. The law says so. So be careful of saying, okay, well, we won't only give refunds up until a certain number of days and that kind of stuff, because you could be in breach of the law. What's worse than actually losing that one sale value of, say, $50 is having to go and get a lawyer to pay for, thousands of dollars when you've got, some kind of government claim going on, or you end up in court. So that's going to cost you 10 grand as opposed to the $50 that, you had to refund someone. So just be mindful of that. Trademarks. It's not expensive to register trademarks, guys. You can actually do this on your own online on ipaustralia.com.au. They've got heaps of videos on there. Look, we're happy to take your money to do your trademarks for you, but I want to make sure that you realize that you can actually do it, and it will only cost you $250 for the IP Australia fee. But do watch the video so that you understand how the legislation works around distinctiveness. So if you find that someone has breached your trademark, you need to first think about, okay, is it actually impacting my business? Because if you want to go down that route and fight it, again, it can be expensive to do so. So you're best off writing to them first, having the conversation with them saying, did you realize you're breaching my trademark? Most people will get scared by that straight away anyway. And most people don't realize. If it's someone in China that's breaching your trademark, that's a little bit more difficult to deal with, because you have to have that correspondence across countries, and then you end up in service of documents and that kind of stuff. Again, you're going to throw thousands of dollars at it. So have a think about, is that actually damaging my business, and should I do what I think I should be doing with it or not? Happy to have a conversation with you around if you have a dispute that comes up in a trademark, and sort of talk you through it in that event. We give free 15-minute consultations when you give a buzz through. So you're better off just asking the question, and we'll sort of give you a suggestion as to whether you should fight it or whether you shouldn't. And if you fight it, what you should do as your next steps. And then you can go away and do that. If you then need us, come back and we'll help you. I'll give you an example. I got the trademark for Zoolander suits several years ago, and then Paramount Pictures tried to sue me, which was really funny because I just ran up their legal bill for a while and then I let it go. Well, they had to suffer as well, right? So it depends on whether you actually really need it. So we've registered virtual legal in 6 countries around, but that's because we're going to be rolling out internationally. If you're just going to be in Australia, and you're better off, even if you can't get the actual registration of the words of what you're doing, you can put through, say, your logo, and that's another way of getting things registered. But it isn't a cheap job to register over line. However, you can do it yourself. Again, this is something else that you can do. So if you are going to have a global market, you are better off making sure you are protecting your assets in those specific areas. But to give you an indication, so a couple of years ago, I did it with ours, and it probably cost me about $4,000 in registration fees. You use your Australian trademark. So you get that first, and then apply through what's called WIPO, W-I-P-O. So that's the international site, and you can find the link to it on the IP Australia website. And you use that to actually apply to the other countries. So that gives you like a one step forward already. Because they go, oh, that's the Australian trademark. Well, obviously these people, have a proper brand, and then they'll use that instead of doing an application over and over again. You're then going to get like a billion emails from, especially in the US, people in the US going, oh, I saw that you've got something coming up and you haven't done this and you haven't done that. They're just trying to get your work. So just ignore them all. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So your intellectual property is one of the most important parts of your business. You have to think about it like this. Is it worth spending the money? Well, the way that you work out whether it's worth it or not, would you be okay to keep running your business if someone set up a business exactly the same with yours with your name and brand? Would that impact your business? If the answer is yes, then yes, it's worth it. So if you have a look on IP Australia, they've got all the different things that you can actually trademark, and they've got fact sheets about what you can trademark, what you can't trademark. You can even trademark a sound. You can trademark a color. So there's a particular color that Cadbury has trademarked. I'm sure there's plenty of sounds that people have trademarked, like little jingles, that kind of stuff as well. So it's amazing what you actually can trademark. But if you're going down that space and you actually invented a design that had some kind of different technology, you'd be looking at a patent as opposed to a trademark. Patents are very expensive. So when you're chatting to someone about in the patent space, make sure that you call around and find out what people's fees are and what it's likely to cost you before you get into that process. Because next minute, you've got a $10,000 bill and you've got nothing to show for it. So just be a little bit careful. Okay, so engaging offshore staff and developers. I'm assuming you guys have probably used or at least heard of Fiverr, Upwork, and then you might have staff in the Philippines, maybe in India. Great way to get people to help you in your business. Really cost effective. We've used it heaps over the years. But there are also some things to think about when you're actually using those. So you'll have to think about if you're doing something, especially if you're using like developers or VAs, data storage. If they're actually doing some work for you and they're storing that stuff, especially if you've got your customers' details in it, where are they putting it? Because if someone, like say if they're in the Philippines and someone grabs their laptop, which is not an unusual thing that, to happen, then you're going to lose all that data. So even though that has happened in another country, or even if they're remoting in to your Australian system, and there's not data crossing over borders, but they're just touching it, someone from outside of Australia that's not required to comply with our laws, touching stuff that's in Australia, you can get caught by the Australian privacy principles. So Australian privacy principle 8 says that you have to use reasonable, make a reasonable attempt essentially to make sure that you've kept data safe. So what's reasonable is going to be different for different people, different businesses, depending on what kind of data you've got. So if you're a doctor, well, what's reasonable is going to be up here. Whereas, it just depends on what you're doing. So just be careful where your data is stored, and also where your data is stored in Australia too. So once it comes back to you, just make sure that you're being safe too. Security measures. So one thing that we do is that we actually have specific, and like I've got VAs that work for me for like 3+ years. These guys are loyal. I go to their house. I know their family. They're like my family. But still, just in case someone else in their place, even though I trust them, if anyone else managed to get into what they've got, we change all the passwords. So they'll get a specific password for what they're doing, especially if you're using Fiverr and someone's getting into the back end of your website or something like that, just to do little jobs. We've had someone get in there and destroy the whole website and put like buttons all over our web page, our front page. It's like, that just looks ridiculous, but it's not something you can fix in 2 seconds. Then they crashed the whole website and wondered why I gave them a 1 star. So keep that in mind too. So just change your passwords around. Be careful if you're working with like developers and stuff. Who owns the intellectual property? If they're going to build your website or they build a software platform for you, most of their agreements will say, hopefully they'll say, the IP will vest in you once you've finished paying for the bill. If you can, make sure the IP vests in you from day one. Everything they create along the way, everything they think of, vests in you. The reason being is, and I've had this recently, and I'm a lawyer, but we didn't end up getting the platform. We spent $60,000 and we don't have the platform. Okay. So that's something that I'm now having to work out what I'm going to do. And I'm a lawyer, right? These silly guys. But the fact is that there's no point chasing someone if they've got no money either. That money's gone. So you don't want to throw good money after bad, but you also want to make sure that you've got ways of checking off little milestones along the way. Show me what you've done so far. Okay, now that will be owned by us. Here's the money for that bit. Show me the next stage. So you know where things are going to go wrong along the way. Yeah. But be really careful around who will own the platform. There's so many contracts we see where people are excited to get stuff done, and next minute they like something's gone wrong, and then they don't own anything, or their business takes off. And they got a great price from the developer, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to IPO or we're going to sell now. And they're like, okay, well, I own that platform, and they say, well, but we'll sell it to you for $5 million. Like, oh, great, your business is over. So be really careful around that. Termination costs. Keep in mind too, when you're going to end a contract with a developer or even VAs, if you're using like some other office overseas to manage the virtual assistants, keep in mind that there might be some kind of termination cost to get out of that contract. So in the Philippines, you pay for what's called the 13-month. That's not a termination thing or anything like that, but it's just something to know that you do pay 1 month's salary at the end of the year as their Christmas bonus, and that's a government legislated thing as well. Yeah, and in terms of liability, just make sure that there is some form of liability and that the value of the indemnity is okay. What that means is that, say if something goes wrong in a software and you say, okay, well, that's okay because the contract between us says that if it goes wrong, then they're liable. That's great. But the next sentence says that they're liable to the extent of the contract. And that was a $200 contract and you've got a $5,000 problem. They're only liable for $200, even though they're liable. So you now have a $4,800 issue for being silly. So watch out for that. That's really important. So many people miss that. And that's called an indemnity. So an indemnity, if someone asks you to indemnify something, it's like guarantees. If you're indemnifying, though, generally they'll ask for both at the same time. So it'll be a guarantee and indemnity. So as the guarantee, they're saying to you, I want you to say that you personally will put your assets on the line if your business doesn't perform. With an indemnity, they're saying, not only are you paying, but we're going to make sure that you actually have to pay for our lawyers' costs, any cost that comes up for us. Like we all had to go and have coffee and beers together to talk about all the damage you've done. You're going to pay for all that as well. So that's what an indemnity is. It means everything. Okay. I think we covered up on that stuff. Any questions? No? We good? Sorry, I'm trying not to bore you to death, but tell you all the pretty much important stuff so you won't destroy your businesses. Now, landlords and virtual options. Okay, so when you're going through, if you're not going to get a lawyer to look at your lease, make sure you look out on stuff like your fit out costs, especially you guys that might have, say, beauty or cafes, that kind of thing. So what can happen is that a landlord might say, here's $10,000 towards your fit out, or 10 or 50,000. If they say that and then you want to sell your business a year later, they often will make you pay the whole lot back. Or they'll actually get to keep all the fit out as well. So be really careful around your fit out costs. Refurbishment costs are something that comes up a lot too. So they'll say you'll have to repaint the building every second year. Watch out for those. They can be a little bit unreasonable and you can negotiate these terms. Personal guarantees come up again. And also change of control. If you change anything of the ownership in your companies or your businesses, you have to tell the landlord. You often have to tell your suppliers as well because it'll be a breach of your contracts. So make sure you don't miss that. Keep your conversations in writing with landlords because anything to do with property and in terms of agreements has to be in writing when it comes to property specifically. Business doesn't have to necessarily always be in writing as long as you can prove there was an agreement, but property has to be in writing. And maintain low burn costs. So don't go out and get a big expensive office if you really don't need it. There's co-working options. There's lots of things to do. Make sure that if something goes really wrong in your business, that you've actually got the ability to wind down as quickly as you can. And a lot of your leases will have, say, 3-year terms. Okay. I'll just whiz through some of these. But having an operations manual is a really good way of identifying risk in your business and having a procedure to actually make sure you've thought about it and other people in your staff also know what to do if this happens. Put all your critical dates like your lease, your contract's expiry, BAS into your calendar so you don't have to stop and think. It just dings up for you so you don't miss anything. If you forget to pay your registration for your company, they'll wind your company down. So it happens a lot. And the bus rule. So make sure that you've built your business so that if something happens to you, someone else can step in. And that might be using, that might be using like powers of attorney, that kind of stuff, so someone else can sign off your documents. I had a fire extinguisher blow up in my face 2.5 years ago and was wiped out of the business for nearly 6 months. So this stuff happens. Like, you would never imagine it, but it happens. Be prepared in case you get wiped out for a long period of time. Now, I know that there's going to be discussion on insurance after this session, so I won't talk about insurance here, but just when you're building a business, make sure you think about where you want it to end up and then structure for that at the beginning if you can. The reason being is that sometimes you might end up with a fantastic business, but it's not saleable because you can't get out of it. So just keep that in mind. Now, just to keep costs down, we are going to be launching a public self-service legal system in February 2019. What that essentially means is that once this is launched, it'll have artificial intelligence chatbots that will talk you through what you're doing. You can create all of your own documentation, but it'll also have accountants, financial planners, lawyers inside the platform. So you can book a 20-minute session with them or a 45-minute session so they can check over what you've done. What this means is that from the time that we launch it, you can save about 90% on your advice costs. So just keep an eye out for that. That'll be February 2019 once all the advisors come back from holidays. So we'll sort of get some more information out to you at that point in time. Thank you so much, guys. If you do have any questions, you're welcome to get in contact with me. Obviously, katie@virtuallegal.com.au or just admin@virtuallegal.com.au. So the Law and Earth platform will be something that I think will give you a lot of help in your business. That we've got a chatbot you can have a bit of a yarn to online as well. So that's Aiden. If you want to do that. Otherwise, you can't get everything right in business. You can just do your best and make sure you've got good insurance, you've got a good accountant, you've got a good lawyer, whether that's us or whether that's someone else. Just make sure that you've got someone to ask questions of before you jump, because spending the money could save you a lot down the track.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Katie.